Okay, so as you guys can see, the little cloud recording button is on. So good evening, everyone. My name is Christina Strelets. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Vice President of the Diversity and Engineering Club. And this is our guest speaker series entitled This is What an Engineer Looks Like. And before we get kind of started with our talk, I just wanted to briefly acknowledge that for anyone tuning in from Edmonton, we are currently on Treaty 6 territory. We are also in the Métis Nation of Alberta Zone 4, and that this land is the home to many diverse Indigenous populations, and they have been stewards of this land for many generations. And I highly encourage anyone to kind of look into the Indigenous people who live on the land that you are currently living on. I swear it's really interesting and really cool. And I think it's important for all of us to learn about where we live. Yeah, so, and now I will go on to proceed to talk about how this event will go by. Like I said, this is our guest speaker series. We have a set of guiding questions that Jessica has looked at and has some answers to, but this is kind of more of a guided discussions, and we're hoping you guys can kind of ask some questions as the discussion goes by. You guys can either drop them in the chat or unmute and feel free to get into it and stuff. So yeah, I want to give it off to our guest speaker, Jessica Vandenberghe.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. It's an honor to come and join you folks tonight. And that was a lovely light acknowledgement. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, yes, yes. So we'll get started with the questions. I have them pulled up now. So our first question that we have for you, Jessica, is that how did you get to where you are today in terms of your career?
And that's a great question always to start with for a career chat. So for me, I grew up in Northern Alberta in a very, very small town. I was born of the Deneta First Nation, but I'm a 60 scoop survivor. So I was adopted at a young age of 3 months into a very inclusive German family. Where I grew up in rural Alberta, there wasn't a whole lot of people that went to university. A lot of people chose to go into trades or to work in the oil field or become farmers or work with their family companies. There was a portion that went to university, but we didn't always see a lot of the professions or the careers that are offered by university. And so what influenced me to go into engineering was actually a career talk in grade 11. A fellow came to our chemistry class and talked about what engineering. And before then, I had thought of going into medicine. But hearing about what engineering is, it sounded a lot more appealing to me and a better fit for who I was. At that point, I was an incredibly shy, introverted person. And so not having to operate on people and deal with people in the medical field sounded appealing to work more on machinery and processes and equipment. And I liked that aspect because my dad always tinkered on things on the farm. He invented new farm equipment. He took old things and made new things, and we were crawling around machines and operating machines since we were little. And so it was very appealing to me. And so I went off into engineering. And I took 2 degrees at the University of Alberta. I took a chemical engineering degree with a computer process control option and the co-op program. And I used the co-op program to figure out what jobs and industries fit for me. And so I tried nuclear research, I tried pulp and paper, I tried petrochemical, and I tried the oil sands. And all the jobs were very different. So there were research, I did a research job, I did reliability and maintenance, I did production planning, I did computer process control and fire alarm system programming, I did working in the mine and extraction plants, working on large equipment and things like that. And so I found for me, I really enjoyed research. I liked research for the creativity side of things. Mm-hmm. If it wasn't for having to make a financial living and having to make money to support myself. And if money wasn't a factor, I would likely be a musician or an artist or something like that. Um, and so research appealed to me and to the creative side of me, that I could invent things, I could design things, I could free think and figure it out and see how things work. And I wanted to stay in my home province. And so the oil sands appealed to me, so I could stay in Alberta. And so I did a master's with the plan of going to do research in the oil sands industry. And so I did a master's that was a joint between chemical and mining engineering that Dr. Zengi Shu had recommended in my final project class. And he and Dr. Masley, Jacob Masley at the time, were coming up with a new program. So it was a joint degree between chemical and mining engineering.
Well, that's pretty
And
cool.
yeah, it was. And I was excited to be part of this initial program. And so I took that. It was meant to bridge the mining and extraction processes in the oil sands. And then from there, I did 10 years working in oil sands research, and I loved it. I worked with a technologist. It was pure engineering. Like, you design a program, you design the equipment with your technologist, they go off and build it, you'd measure everything and you'd figure out what it means mathematically, and you come up with new formulas and you scale it up. So it was great work. And I really, really loved it. And I decided to switch directions a little bit after I had kids, because instead of contributing to the world of knowledge, I wanted to contribute to people instead. And so all along throughout my student career and then into my research engineering career, I always volunteered for things like, if Divi existed, I probably would have been part of Divi. So I was part of things like Wisest, I was part of things like Circle K and social minded community volunteer work. I did a lot of math tutoring for kids in a Musqueam Academy in the high school, things like that along the way. And so when I thought about if I wanted to contribute back to people, where would I want to do that? And I thought of APEGA, the engineering regulator, and the work that they were doing for outreach, for STEM outreach, for diversity, equity, inclusion. It wasn't called that at the time. But then once I applied to APEGA and became the Director of Outreach and Product Services, then I got to do things like diversity and inclusion and equity as part of my job, outreach is part of my job, event planning, like all sorts of things. I got to work on a video game. I got to help invent a video game to encourage kids into school. I worked on, it was pretty cool. And then I got to work on creating a practice standard to help manage life transitions for primarily females going in and out of their engineering jobs, for things like maternity leave or secondment or things like that. So a lot of things, interesting things I got to work on there. And then they wanted me to help on the regulatory side. So I did that for a little while. So I was Director of Enforcement and Permits and learned a lot about the legal system. Took a lot of people to court, ran the disciplinary tribunals. And I got a chance to go into a lot of rooms with a lot of CEOs from a lot of the engineering companies and sit at a lot of tables that if it wasn't for that job, I probably wouldn't have. So I sat at national and provincial and municipal tables to talk about engineering. I was part of, they asked me to sit at the table when they redid the math curriculum for K to 12 here in the province, when they redid the math. I was part of a group for Let's Talk Science that was trying to envision what the education system should look like in the year 2067, and what that should look like. So there's a lot of opportunities that came with that job, and it opened a lot of doors for me. But I felt a calling after that. I felt a calling to give back to Indigenous communities. And so I went and became an Indigenous community consultant. And so it was another left turn in my career, going from regulatory to consultancy, but also to infrastructure consultancy. And so we worked with communities to figure out their infrastructure needs, to work on water projects or governance, or how they can build an administration building, what needs to be done to get through the permit process and the regulatory side, but also the just community consultation rules and things like that. So I work primarily with First Nations and Métis settlements and Métis Nations. And that was very meaningful work, but it also took an it was emotionally heavy since it is a little bit more personal to me being an Indigenous person. And then I left turned again a little bit and joined the faculty just back in April, actually. So I joined initially as an industrial professor of Indigenous engineering. And then in July, they asked me to be the acting assistant dean of outreach. And so I'm back to doing things that I am really, really passionate about. So talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, truth and reconciliation, K-12 outreach, wellness, like all sorts of things. So that's how I got to where I am today.
Well, congratulations on the I guess relatively new position, yeah, from April. And your career sounds very, very interesting with all the really cool left turns you took there, and really goes to show how one degree path can take you down so many different ways in your like career. Yeah. So the next question we have, which you briefly touched on, is like if you mind going a little bit more into what really inspired you about engineering.
For sure. So to me, engineering, like many people, like any public person, the majority of them don't know what engineering is. You hear the word, but you're not quite sure what it is.
Yeah.
And so I, like many people, with this one career talk that this fellow did, said engineering. I said, okay, well, I'll just do that, and went into engineering. But over the years, I put a lot of thought into what is engineering. And is it a job? Is it a task? Is it a career? Is it a profession? Is it a mindset? And I think it's all of those things, right? And so what inspired me to pursue it was the idea that you could create, that you could build, that it's quite flexible. And what I have learned of chemical engineering and some of the more broader engineering disciplines is that you can move in and out of different industries. So I also like the flexibility of it. And for me, growing up in small town Alberta, I also really liked engineering because it gave me a chance to travel. So even my co-op terms, I intentionally chose co-op terms that were not in Edmonton because otherwise I wouldn't have had that chance to travel around the country.
Yeah.
And then with APEGA, doing national work with a lot of the other provincial regulators, it allowed me to see the country.
Oh, we have a question here, and it's, why did you choose chemical engineering?
So I chose chemical engineering because just like many people assume that you do a lot with chemistry. And so I was really good at chemistry. So I'm like, oh, chemical engineering. But once you go into chemical engineering, you realize it's not chemistry so much as process. And so that appeals to me because I like to be more of a higher level strategic thinker. I like to see the big picture, and then I can dive down into whatever task I need to do, right? And so chemical engineering is one of those disciplines where you get to design the black box. So you figure out what's going in, what's going out, what you want to come out of it, and then you figure out, your job is to figure out what's going into that. And so for the oil sands, that was specific to the oil sand. So we could figure out what type of oil sand is going in, what we want out, if you change the solids in it, how much more chemicals do you have to add, or do you have to heat it up, or do you have to change flow rates, or what do you have to do in order to get out what you want? But this idea of black box thinking and process design, I found was also applicable to any other arena. So when I went to K-12 outreach, and for things, for example, like this video game, thinking about what we wanted in the end, I could design the process that we needed in order to get this video game up and out the door.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. And to your point earlier, I think everyone here can kind of agree that it is really difficult to like personally define what engineering is, even as an engineering student, even as an engineer. Because I think a lot of us recognize that, like when you think about it, it's more than just like, you know, a degree you do, because like engineers do play I think personally, like a role in our society, right? So it's all very, very interesting and fascinating. So I really like the points you bring up with that. And then it's really interesting to hear how the mindset that you learned from like your studies, you were able to apply in so many other situations, which I think just really shows the great value of studying engineering, truly. And from this, I think we'll move on to the next question we have, and that is this one's I think it's a tough one for everyone. But how do you define success?
How do I define success? And so everybody defines it differently. And as you go through your life, you enter different stages of your life, right? So um, in the beginning, I got caught up in the kind of the capitalist definition of success. You work hard. The more money you get paid means you're successful. Um,
Mhm.
and same with, oh, you got to climb the corporate ladder. Like moving up the next level means you're successful. Now that I'm older and have been through many different jobs, I define success a little differently than that now. Now it's more about personal happiness. It's about flexibility. Um, your mindset does change when you have kids, and kids aren't the path for everyone, but they were the path for me. And I think about that. I also define success as being a good mom, having good balance between my personal life and my professional life and how it all ties together, as well as being healthy. And
Yeah.
so to me now, success is, am I safe? Do I have regular happy moments and experiences in my life? Am I healthy in my mind, in my physical body, in my emotions, in my spiritual belief? And can I live with ease? And so being an engineer definitely helps with the living with ease, because it gives you the financial stability in order to have a roof over my head and have the fortune of being able to work at home rather than out while we're during this pandemic. And so it's a job that has allowed me to be successful.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think everyone can kind of personally also relate to that idea of your personal definition of success changing with time. And I don't have kids, but like I definitely have had things happen in my life that have made me like refocus to what is traditionally like taught to us by our society of just like getting to the next position, getting to the higher position, getting more money, and that's more happiness. And that, our success is truly defined by so many aspects of what makes us us, and we really need to define just success on a personal level. And ultimately, like the many factors that you said, that then that is all about, thinking about your whole life and being happy with who you are at the end, right? So yeah. Yeah, that's a really, really great answer and really great to hear. Um, and then what our next question is what do you enjoy most about your work?
So what do I enjoy most about my work? I have always thought of this idea that at the end of my career, and I'm not at the end of my career, I'm mid-career, I would like to work at the university, and now it's happened. So I do love working with students. I do love chatting with students, having conversations. I mean, you folks are at the stage of life where you're just so excited about everything. And it's just energizing, and it's so exciting to see and be able to share with you the things that I have gone through to hopefully make your paths a little bit easier. And that to me is extremely rewarding. And the work I do for truth and reconciliation is extremely important. And the same with equity, diversity, inclusion. The engineering profession has a ways to go when it comes to organizational culture, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and even the truth and reconciliation is even
Mhm.
further
Yeah,
further
yeah.
back.
Mhm.
But being part of conversations with people that give them those aha moments that make them want to change their attitudes and behaviors is extremely rewarding.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
those are the things that I love about this job for sure.
Well, I'm glad you enjoy, energizing us students who, yeah, a lot of us are just at the beginning of our lives, of our career. So it is there truly are limitless possibilities until you really start digging into your career. And it's lovely hearing from people like you and being inspired from people like you and hearing about like all the ways your careers can go and how many options there are. So it's really great to hear that and great that you love talking to us.
For sure, I
So,
do.
yeah, and then the next question I have prepared for you is why is diversity? I mean, you've talked about this a bit, but why is diversity and inclusion in the engineering, particularly in the engineering work field, important to you?
So diversity, first of all, is incredibly important because our population is diverse, right?
Yes.
Like we already chatted that you're originating from Ukraine, and I'm born Indigenous, but raised German. Our
Mhm.
country is incredibly diverse,
Yes.
and within each ethnic group, wherever you come from, there's so much capability. There's so many ideas, there's so many things that could benefit community and society and the engineering professions and engineering companies. And so it's clear why diversity is important to lead to innovation and efficiency and things like that. But the engineering profession right now is not fully diverse, so it's not representative of the population. And if you look at the female percentage side of things, it's not where it needs to be. And so the only way to get there is through inclusion. And the idea of inclusion is building safe cultures,
Yeah.
safe communities,
Mhm.
safe organizations where people can show up authentically and just be themselves and then get to work and do their job
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and not have to deal with things like
Mhm.
unconscious bias or
Yeah.
discrimination or all the
Mhm.
way to racism and things like that. And so
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
passionate about it because I've
Mhm.
been in the minority since the day one, like just being an Indigenous person where I grew up, there wasn't a whole lot of Indigenous families. And then being a female on top of that in the engineering profession, often I'm the only one. And it, it's a shame because there is so much capability. And I'm passionate about it because again, I just want to keep forging ahead and creating a path to make it a little easier for minority groups to get into the engineering profession because it is a great profession.
Yep. And that's as the Diversity in Engineering Club, that is part of our purpose is that for everyone who's in the engineering program who feels like maybe, like they don't belong just because of basic aspects of who they are, because it is a pretty homogenous, homogenous student body, homogenous like work field. So we really do want to make sure that at least in your undergraduate studies, there's a space where you can feel welcome and you know that you belong here and deserve to belong here because we as a group even just recently discussed like you mentioned, it's more than just having like a diverse workforce. That workforce that is diverse needs to feel comfortable in the inclusion aspect to be authentically themselves because if they need to repress their capabilities and their ideas, then you're not getting the benefits of diversity. So yeah, that's like nail on the head. Yes, that's the saying. Spot on there. Yes, and so the next question I have is obviously all these questions you've been touching on as we go what are some of the obstacles you faced in your career and how did you overcome them, I guess. Both parts. Don't want to just hear the negatives.
For sure, for sure. So definitely challenges are unconscious bias and prejudice and discrimination and racism. It's one of those things where like I grew up in it, being an Indigenous person in my community. Um, and it's something that you just feel like you can feel it when you walk in the room and people don't want you to be there, or you can feel it when they're talking behind your back, or they're inviting you because just for the show of it, right? So you can tell
Mhm.
when people are not being um, um, very inclusive, like when they genuinely mean hey,
Yeah.
come and be part of this, right? And so since I was little, I've learned unconsciously different ways of dealing with that. And so not letting what people think of me really sink in and be personal. I'm very good at compartmentalizing and being able to, okay, that happened. I'm going to deal with that later and just kind of
Yeah,
push it off
yeah.
for now. And then I've learned tactics of how later on how to process the emotions and things that bubble up with some of these actions and attitudes and things that people say. Um, and so when it happens in the workplace, I've been through situations where in my first career in the oil sands, I worked for 10 years as a senior research engineer, and I had eight bosses in 10 years, so quite a few bosses. For me, that was actually, in hindsight, very useful, even though it didn't feel that way during it sometimes. But I had good bosses and bad bosses. And so the thing about the bad bosses, it was a chance for me looking back to practice different things. So practice, how do I talk with a boss? How do I talk about career? How do I overcome imposter syndrome? How do I talk about the things that I grew up with a large fear of authority. So how do I overcome that in the workplace? And so it gave me a chance to practice that, but it also gave me a chance to see the characteristics that I really liked from good leaders.
Yeah.
And so when I had a chance to become a leader, I knew exactly how I wanted to be, how I wanted to show up for my team, the things I wouldn't do, and the things that I would do.
That
And
just,
so it allowed me, yeah,
sorry.
it allowed me to be a much better boss for sure. Yeah.
I was just going to say it's exactly that idea of like leading by example. You saw by example what you enjoyed in a good leader and what you felt was a good quality, and now you bring that into your work when you become the leader. So yeah. And then I think your work is just incredible what you're doing with the youth, because it really does start at youth, where all these really horrible and terrible unconscious biases that sometimes lead to death and lead to like really awful things, but they're just so ingrained in our culture. And what needs to be done is these types of reforms, and that start with kids. So it's really inspiring, all the work you've done and all the work that's being put into it now. And it's really interesting to hear about how you've learned to take those negative experiences in the workforce and kind of challenge yourself to figure out how to overcome this, and not just to, like suffer through. And so, yeah, very, very awesome to hear about. And not awesome that you had obstacles, but everyone does. But great to hear how you've overcome from them and how you challenge yourself to learn from them. And really, really great to hear that, we've got great coping mechanisms. We support healthy coping mechanisms here in Divi. Yes, you can compartmentalize, but never forget those emotions. They are very important to address.
For
Yes.
sure, definitely. I agree with that statement, right? And it took me a long time to figure out how to healthily process these things. But yes, definitely you have to process those emotions in a healthy manner.
Yes, yes. And then the next question we have is, are you where you thought you would be in your career, and how have your kind of career goals changed over time?
So surprisingly, I am where I had hoped to be, as I
Yeah.
mentioned earlier. Like at some points, like I always thought, oh, it'd be great to end at the university. I didn't think it would happen so soon, but I am incredibly grateful that it has. Um, I am incredibly grateful. Um, Throughout my career, I also have learned that you have to, the only one in charge of your career is you, right? And so um, when I was getting frustrated in the oil sands and wanted to change, um, I put a lot of thought into where I wanted to go next, and it was APEGA. And I applied there actually a few times, and it wasn't until the third time that I was successful. And so I did my homework. I researched the people that I needed to talk to. I made sure I was at those events. I worked my network, and I was persistent and managed to get in there. And so the same with when I left to become an Indigenous community consultant. I had a contact and he had wanted me to come work with him for quite a while. And then finally things aligned where I said, you know what, maybe now's the time. And it lined up, and I went there. And the same with this job at the university. Um, I do have I have put a lot of work into my spiritual belief inside and intention and putting good things out into the world. Um, I also am a planner. That usually comes with being an engineer. And so I set 10-year goals for myself. And so, you put little efforts towards those goals every day. And then next thing you know, you're where you thought you would be in 10 years, right? Because the time does fly fast, right? And so spending time on your own self-awareness, spending time on your own goal setting is worth it. I just coincidentally have this right beside me, but I am a fan of journaling. And so I have a journal that, I wrote my dreams and aspirations in for many years. Like I envisioned what if I ever ran my own company, what it would look like if I ever did this, or if I ever did that, that's what it looked like. You just break down your random thoughts, and then one day it turns into a plan, and then having the courage to take an opportunity when it comes is the other piece of advice I would give. So look for those opportunities and then have the courage to take it.
Yeah, I think it was really great to hear, very poignant to hear that ultimately, yes, you are in charge of what you want out of your career. And you have all the charge about what you ultimately want to do. And I think sometimes you kind of get lost in an idea of what things should be. And then if you don't like whatever your original plan was, then that's okay. Because ultimately, like you said, you do have control. And it's great. It's really awesome that you managed to like have that like goal, like career goal satisfied. That must have felt very, very nice. And congratulations once again. Sorry, I said it so many times.
Thanks. No, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, I love hearing about like the journaling and stuff, and the active thought that needs to be put into continuously into your career, because it is your career, and if you want it to be very satisfying, you have the power to do so. And like you put in, it's very inspiring to hear like you were thinking about what you wanted out of your career, and then you went and you did it. You put in the work, you found the network, you did what you had to do, and it's really great to hear. Very inspiring to hear, actually. And then now this one's a very interesting one. It's what would you do differently if you had to start your career all over again?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's a whole lot that I would change. For students, what I would encourage you to do is think about all the other disciplines of engineering as well, right? I didn't realize that there was 44 different disciplines offered across Canada, and within the world, there's even more. And so you can really think about what things you love to do, whether it's like music or audio or skiing or whatever it is that you like to do, and think about a discipline that will give you the flexibility to eventually make your things that you're passionate about part of your job, right? And so I mentioned before that there are some core disciplines like chemical, mechanical, civil, electrical that are quite broad. And so they allow you to move between industries. But if you're someone who's truly passionate about, say, space, and you want to get into space, then you can focus very specifically on aerospace engineering or space engineering or something that will allow that to happen.
Yeah, yeah. So, sorry, just reiterating the question. So, if you were to do your career again, would you change anything? Would you like have a different path? I'm sorry if it just went over my head, but
No. So no, I don't think I would change anything.
well, that's
the
lovely.
lessons, the lessons that you learn in your life, you're meant to learn them, and they teach you things. They teach you strength and resilience and courage, and how to fall down and get up again, how to fail, how to grow this. I'm a believer in the 7 sacred teachings of Indigenous people. So they're love, respect, honesty, truth, wisdom, courage, and humility. And the humility teaching is an important one, I think, for engineers. That you got to learn how to fail, and you got to learn how to make mistakes, and then be able to say, you know what, I made a mistake. Let's figure out what we do now, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so would I have changed anything? No, I don't think I would have.
No, that's really great to hear and really lovely to hear. And those teachings sound very, very applicable to like all aspects of life and really lovely. And I do think it's very important, yeah, for us as like maybe even as a for any of our first year students coming in who are always very high achievers, that none of us are an infallible God. We're all going to make mistakes sometimes, and that's okay. And I think it's like it's very important, like you said, to own up to your mistakes, especially as an engineer. If you messed up something, you got to tell people ethically. So,
Exactly. And
yeah,
it's okay. Like, it's okay. It's better, and it's better to tell people
people get
um,
hurt.
before people
Yeah.
get hurt, or that it goes too far, right?
Hmm.
And it's okay. We all have to do it at some point.
Yep. 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 Yeah. Mistakes are inevitable. So this brings us into our final question, and you've kind of been giving tips the whole time, but so any tips for our engineering students who are just starting their engineering careers, whether they're in first year or starting off into their co-op terms or just in their degree program? So yeah.
um, I think the advice that I already mentioned, kind of look into disciplines and things like that, but also look into public speaking. As mentioned, I was an incredibly shy, introverted person,
Mhm.
but I find that I need to be able to talk to people. No
Yeah.
matter what, you're going to have to talk to people. And so figuring out how to do it in a good way that you don't get that huge fear in the pit of your stomach. And to that end, the other piece of advice I'd say is spend time on your own self-awareness and figure out where your fears are, right? I have fear of spiders, and I've been working on that for a number of years. But one thing I do know is that you can overcome fears. Like, I learned that through working on that fear of spiders. I've worked on public speaking. My mom gave me and my brothers all a fear of water. I've been working on that over the years, and now can swim and dive and things like that. And now that I'm older, I'm trying to tackle the larger fears from some of the more traumatic events that happened in my childhood, like fear of abandonment and fear of attachment and things like that. So there's other things that that everyone always has some sort of fear of something. And so spending the time to figure out what it is, and then having the courage to slowly work at it and process it and overcome it is something that will help you in your whole life, not just your career.
Yeah. Yeah. I think definitely a lot of all the advice that comes from like your career or just come from everyday advice, they are kind of very applicable. And I think that ultimately comes down to the fact that most of us will be spending a significant portion of our lives doing our careers. So it does naturally make sense that these like advice paths kind of cross each other. And then to your point earlier about like looking into the wide variety of fields, like you said, over 44 engineering programs within Canada alone. So there's so many different subfields you can go into. And just hearing from like your co-op terms, like, you know, like you took the chance to try a wide variety of fields because the program really, you know, allows you to do so. And, you know, you ultimately, you, like you said, you are in charge of your career, and your engineering degree, even if it's one discipline, it's extremely broad. There are many multiple like degree paths you can go down just with a single engineering degree within a single discipline. And sometimes those things kind of like mingle. So yeah. And then we have another question from the chat, and that would be, you mentioned overcoming imposter syndrome. Any tips for students trying to overcome imposter syndrome? Yes, yes, please.
For sure. So imposter syndrome, I think everybody's familiar with it, but it's when you walk into a room and you feel inadequate, or you feel that you don't know what people are asking of you, and you feel a bit like a fraud, but you're not. So how do you overcome imposter syndrome? I think the biggest advice I'd give on that is to find mentors. One thing that I always need to tell myself, because we tend to tell ourselves stories in our heads, and we
Mhm.
make things larger than in actuality they are. And so you need people to give you that feedback to say, okay, that isn't quite as large as you might think it is. And you need people to be able to tell you that in a way that they don't invalidate your feelings. Because just because, for example, I'm afraid of spiders and say you're not, doesn't mean that that fear isn't really, really big to me. It is really big to me. But I can still get your advice saying, you know what, it's not so big to you because, well, you know, for whatever reason, you're not afraid of spiders. So having those mentors and safe places to talk about what's worrying you is important. And so having mentors and allies and just colleagues that you can feel safe and confide in is important. And so for me, I've always belonged to a lot of different circles. And so for in my professional career, I've belonged to things like Wisest and UA Wiser. I'd go to things like the CC West conferences. I'd go to the Winston leadership courses, like all these things for professional women. And it made me listen and hear that I'm not the only person to feel like this.
Yeah, yeah, I
Um,
think that's great to hear. You sound like a very successful individual, and it is even reassuring for myself to hear that you've also dealt with imposter syndrome and that it is a real thing. So yes, continues. My
yeah, for sure. No, no, no. The last thing I wanted to say is that you got to remember that there's millions of people in the world.
Mhm.
Somebody has been through your situation before, even though it doesn't feel that way. And the example I usually give for that one is having kids. Like one day, if you choose to have kids, you will feel like the first person in the entire universe to ever have kids. That you're going to break this little baby, and you're like, why? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. How do I get through this? But you got to remind yourself that there are millions of babies being born every day. It's okay. And to seek out people going through a similar experience to you at the same time helps with that imposter syndrome as well.
Mhm. So I hope it helps everyone here to hear someone who has had such an interesting and like diverse career path as Jessica here. She's also dealt with imposter syndrome and she's been where we have been and she's made it through. Look, she's living proof. You made it through. You can be indecisive about your career and still make your career goals. So I think that's really really awesome to hear. And then yes, I mentioned earlier we went through all of our pre-planned questions. So if anyone else has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we can continue discussing. So yeah, so great to hear imposter syndrome. That one really not fun. Yeah,
And
and
it's one of those things too that it comes with any new experience. Like every left turn I've taken in my career, I've had doubts like, oh, was this a good idea? Should I have done this? Like, well, what if it doesn't work out? And it's okay if it doesn't work out.
yep,
You have to also remember that you're looking for a fit for you, but the company is also looking for a fit too. And if it's not the right fit, it's okay.
yep.
Um, there are many companies and many jobs and many places, and you just need to experience and try to figure out what the right fit is.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I completely agree. And I think that that like kind of message that like, hey, sometimes it doesn't work out and sometimes like you think it's gonna be really bad and sometimes it does happen, but you can change it, things can change, and that's okay. So I think that's a really important message to keep and it just goes to show how much your like individual thoughts play such a big role even in something that you wouldn't think stuff like your mental health plays a role in like your career, but it does. It plays an enormous role. And because ultimately your thoughts and like you said like working on your fears and like overall working to make sure that you're happy, you're satisfied, or whatever that version is, and how important it is in like to be satisfied in your personal life, to be satisfied in your professional life. And like like your tip for like your career was to help students work with their personal fears, which just goes to show like like you can have imposter syndrome, but that is something you need to work on, and you can't let that fear stop you from new experiences, because I think that's like a big obstacle for everyone. And just like you said, remembering literally like billions of people in the world, there are tons who have been where you have been. Yeah, so yeah. And then we have a comment here, and we have not a question. Oh, woohoo. Yeah, so we just have someone coming in and talking about how it was really refreshing to hear from you, and they are themselves unsure about their career path. So it was nice to hear from you. I definitely deeply relate to that as well. I think we're all kind of in a position, since we haven't graduated yet, where technically all career possibilities are open, and sometimes a lot of choice, it is overwhelming. So
It
yeah.
is overwhelming. And one last thing that made me think of another comment I'd like to make is
Mhm.
that when I worked for Pega, and when I worked out in the engineering field for sure, often we'd have discussions around engineering versus science. What is the difference? And especially when I worked at Pega, we'd have a lot of questions, because we had to determine whether a task or a piece of work was the product of the practice of engineering, or was it a science, or was it technology, or was it something else that wasn't engineering. Um, and so then people always asked for advice too around, like, is it better to, for example, be a computer scientist versus a software engineer or a computer engineer. But what I would always say, and what I would say now too, is that um, the difference between science and engineering is that science is working on theories. You're collecting data, you're analyzing the data. Engineering is a little bit more at the beginning, a little bit more at the end. So it's also designing using these scientific concepts. So it's applied math and science. So you're applying all these interesting scientific phenomena that scientists gather, and you're designing with it. You're making something for the use and convenience of humans. And then you also, as an engineer, need to think about, well, you need to see that all the way through, from initial concept design through design, construction, use, and everything, and then put everything back the way it was, which is the idea of sustainability,
Yeah.
that you're thinking ahead to the impact of your decisions. For in the Indigenous world, we say you always think ahead 7 generations. But the difference as well that people need to consider between a science degree and an engineering degree is that getting an engineering degree, or sorry, getting a science degree doesn't close any doors, but an engineering degree will open extra doors that a science degree doesn't.
Mhm.
And having that license opens other doors to you to give you more flexibility in the future.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then, yeah, always making important to tie it back that your degree doesn't define you. And like hearing, like, you did chemical and processing and you worked in the oil fields, but then you also designed a video game. So, like, I don't think that was part of any of like the chemi classes, but you still did it. So, you're not like, tied down. You're like, oh, graduated chemi and you will be here forever. So, yeah, I think that's really, really awesome to hear. And I think we're closing up on our time on our discussion. So I will stop the recording and we can continue discussing for those who want to continue. So yeah, I'm just gonna stop the recording right now.